Here are the best legendary cards to craft in Hearthstone right now. Bear in mind it's not going to include any adventure cards because you have to buy those with the adventure wings. So don't moan at me if you don't see Reno Jackson. And also, this is going to bear in mind value as well as how good the cards are. So no, there aren't any class card legendaries on this list because I don't think any of them are good enough to craft those instead of crafting a legendary that you can use in multiple decks. Let's start with Aya Blackpaw. I think Aya Blackpaw is really valuable because not only can you use her in like a stereotypical Jade Lotus slow building deck, we're starting to see her in more aggressive and mid-range style decks as well. She provides enough value that you don't have to run certain other types of Jade Lotus cards as well, but also she's going to be exponentially better if you've been playing Jade Lotus the entire game as well. It doesn't take many Jade Lotus cards to make Aya Blackpaw good, and you can run her in 3 different classes, and that's why she's made it to my top legendaries to craft list. The next is Blood Mage Falnos, and Blood Mage Falnos is always one that people will moan about crafting, and there's another one on this list that people also don't like the look of because it's a 1-1. Have a guess at what that one is, we'll get to that later. Blood Mage Falnos doesn't look like much on the tin, it's just going to give you spell power +1, it's just going to draw you a card when it dies, but the power of Blood Mage Falnos comes in the fact that both of those card effects are together on one card, and in a game where you can't put more than 30 cards in a deck, having both effects in one card actually makes it more powerful and more valuable. You can have this in Miracle Rogue, you can have this in aggro decks that use things like Spirit Claws, and I think if you have the spare dust, it might be worth thinking of crafting Blood Mage Falnos. Alexstrasza is maybe a bit more flashy than the previous entry on the list, and of course she's just going to burn your opponent down to 15 health, a staple for freeze mages, control decks, mages, basically a lot of mage decks like Alexstrasza, a lot of dragon decks with control elements like Alexstrasza, and to be honest she just fits in really well in a kind of control meta. She's really good utility if you need to stay alive against aggro decks, but she's even better at burning your opponent down and then using spells to finish them off. Leroy Jenkins is next on the list, and a lot of players who have played Hearthstone for a little while now will remember that Leroy got nerfed and everyone basically stopped playing him. That was until the standard rotation when Arcane Golem got a nerf, which basically turned Arcane Golem into a useless card. Leroy has now taken the place of the aggro charger in a lot of decks. 6 damage for 5 mana is the best finisher some decks have, and it does fit in a lot of places, and it's also a neutral card, which means you can just slot it into any deck where you need a little bit of extra damage. Leroy Jenkins is sneaking its way back into relevance in the past year, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. Definitely a good valuable legendary to craft though, if you want one that's both going to finish games off and fit into a lot of decks. 5th on my list, it's a classic, it's Ragnaros the Fire Lord. How can you ignore Ragnaros, a burning fire god lord thing? I don't really play World of Warcraft, can you tell? It's going to deal 8 damage as soon as you play him. Now, that's pretty good, and I don't think anyone's going to argue with me about that. The random effect can be controlled by destroying other things on the opponent's side of the board, and Ragnaros has always been considered not the best legendary, but always a good one to craft as one of your first legendaries, because it's going to fit into a lot of decks. It's a really good finisher. If you need just something to go into your mid-range or control deck, Ragnaros is your guy. And next up, another classic, Sylvanas Rimrunner is, I would say, my favourite legendary in Hearthstone, and it hasn't really been trumped by anything recently. Sylvanas is just really good. If they don't have a direct answer to that, that could single-handedly win you the game. Sylvanas gets run in so many control decks because it just destroys the opponent's strategy if they don't have an efficient removal card or a board state that lends itself to dealing with it. It could single-handedly both destroy a minion and give you that minion, in essence, because it's removing it off the opponent's side of the board and giving it to you. Kazakus is next on the list. It is something that has made Reno decks terrifying. It can combine so many different effects in so many efficient ways that it makes it basically impossible to beat a Reno deck if you're running a deck that doesn't lend itself to go late game. Kazakus is so versatile that it can both be played in the early game and the late game. You can make a card that you need for the specific moment. It's just so good. The only downside to Kazakus is obviously it requires an expensive deck to make, so make sure you have enough cards to fill out every single slot with a different card, and of course Kazakus may not be as good in a few months time when Reno Jackson rotates out of the meta, because obviously Standard is going to kick League of Explorers out of the door into Wild, which means Kazakus may not be as powerful, but we'll see. And finally on my list, it's a 1-1. It's Patches the Pirate. Who would have thought that a 1-1 legendary, actually two 1-1 legendaries, would be two of the best cards in Hearthstone? Patches the Pirate has taken the ladder by storm. He charges onto the board on turn 1 if you go anything higher than rank 15 on the ladder, and he's going to cause you a horrible time with his good old pal, Small Time Buccaneer. So this is something that a lot of people are salty about, so what better thing to do than to just join in? If you're salty about something, become the thing you hate and rain terror on everyone else. There's my 8 legendary cards to craft in Hearthstone. If you have anything that you think I missed, be sure to let me know in the comments below. And of course, if you like this and you want to see more Hearthstone and other gaming stuff as well, be sure to head on over to Zoid Gaming, hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.